Okay, so here we are. Um, and I just want to read this quote to you because it says pretty much everything you need to know about shrubs. Shrubbiness is such a remarkable adaptive design that one may wonder why more plants have not adopted it. And as we go through this talk, we will we will find out more about why this is. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Not that, I mean, Laura said everything that was relevant, but I want to add a little bit, which is it has been a long time. I was looking around in my files and I found a, a pamphlet written by Bob Muhlenberg, who was the um, guy who made Muhlenberg Prairie at the Morton Arboretum. And he wrote this thing in like the late 70s. So there it was in my files. And it was a description of all of the native shrubs that he knew of in the basically what was the Chicago Wilderness region, which is the same region that Gerald Wilhelm covers and Laura Rodriguez cover in Flora of the Chicago region, which came out some years ago. But prior to that, it was Wilhelm and Swink. So I have both editions. And Molenberg was very important in all of that. So who knew? And the cool thing is that, or what's encouraging, is that he was describing shrubs, and after every shrub, a lot of shrubs that we know and love, like, oh, I don't know, black chokeberry or some other things, he would say not really available in the nursery trade. And of course, now we can get some of the more obscure things we still can't get and probably wouldn't want to get, but we can get so many shrubs compared to the late 70s and early 80s. It's remarkable. And I believe that it is part of the reason our gardening landscapes are changing. So it was a nice little travel trip back into the past to see how much things have changed now. One of my personal moments of insight, epiphanies, before I started really thinking about shrubs, I was gardening and I had a lot of prairie plants, and I was switching over. I learned not to use fungicides. I learned not to use pesticides. I had little kids. I didn't want them impacted by it all. I subsequently dropped out of being a master gardener because the master gardening program at that time in the early 90s was still very much invested in ornamentals and all kinds of chemical inputs. And in fact, I have a sort of a little ring binder with color pictures of the insect enemies. And nowadays, about half those insect enemies we think of as beneficial insects. So again, how things change. Anyway, so I became a master gardener dropout and plunged into native plants. But I didn't know about shrubs. And then one day I went to a conference and I was talking with a guy who is in fish and wildlife. And he said, everything from the bird's eye view, we were talking about birds migrating. And he said, from the bird's eye view, everything looks green from up there because the US has so many trees and everything looks great. And he said, and then they drop down, and what they discover is a landscape very much like the one you're looking at, which is trees and lawn. And he said, that is a landscape of death. That's what he said, this guy. And I said, whoa, what? So he explained to me how birds really need structure. They need shrubs. They need the fruits that shrubs give. They need the caterpillars that shrubs host. They need all of this stuff. They need the cover. They need the shelter. And they come down in these areas, suburban areas, on their migration or just when they're looking for a home to nest in. And it's barren, it's not useful for birds. And that single conversation changed my thoughts about a lot of things. And I started looking at my yard, and consequently, I started looking at my yard and I started saying, oh, there's all these plants, but I don't have as many birds as I would like to have. So I started planting shrubs. So then after a while, my yard looked like um, a very wild place, kind of untidy, and there were a lot of shrubs in that were growing just fine, and they were crowding my native plants, and my native plants were adapting, and it was not what you would call a planned design at all. However, it was great. Uh, Tons of butterflies, tons of bees, tons of birds, et cetera, et cetera. And this was very meaningful to me because 2 years ago I moved to a new place where I had to literally start completely over. And you'll be hearing more about that as we go. But landscape of death. However, in the things I was learning, landscape of death part two. This is a fairly recently installed um, landscape on a block in North Oak Park. I do not know who the owners are. And it's very neat and tidy. The lawn looks like it's not too manicured, so that's good. But nothing in this picture in, I might say, 2025. So I would think people would know a little bit better, but no, nothing in this picture is native. Um, and you have horticultural alliums, which honeybees love. And you've got catmint, and you've got more horticultural alliums because once you have a few, you will have many, many, many forever and ever. You've got hostas. You've got in the back, you've got hydrangeas, and you've got looks like a couple of boxwood over here on the right, and that's another kind of landscape of death because yes, bees will come to the catnip. As I said, honeybees love the horticultural alliums, which are, as far as I know, non-native. Um, and That's pretty much it. Nope, no caterpillars, no great spring flowers, no, the mulch is very, very tidy, so there's no really good, how robins and cardinals and other birds like to mess around, digging down and seeing if they can get earthworms and stuff. So to me, this is just another version. This is the low version of the landscape of death. And I might sound harsh, but I have to say that I have a lot of experience and I'm old, so I'm allowed to say these things. All right, next. All right, so let's start by what is a shrub? You all know it when you see it. And you're probably saying, I'm imagining you're saying, okay, we got two trees in the middle. On the right, tall shrub, small tree, maybe multi-trunked. And over here, if you can see my cursor, you've got this cute little guy over here. That, of course, is a shrub. We all know it, right? I mean, it gets questionable with certain other shrubs, as we'll talk. But basically, the official scientifically approved definition is a woody plant with several perennial stems that may be erect or may lay close to the ground. It will usually have a height less than 13 feet and stems no more than about 3 inches in diameter. And of course, there are exceptions if you start thinking about certain native shrubs like wafer ash. They can be below 13 feet, but if they're in a really good spot that they like and they have the genetics, they will grow up to 25 feet. And there are other shrubs like that too. Staying with wafer ash, they can be multi-trunked or they can grow more of in a tree form, just like a round leaf dogwood has a similar growth pattern. Looks different because it has different leaves. But that's basically it. And shrubs worldwide, shrubs are doing pretty well because when you have devastating forest fires, for example, a lot of times some of the landscape might flip into what they call shrub barrens. And that they may or may not be ecologically functional, because I don't really understand Western ecology too well. But I know that just the name barrens is kind of an indicator. It's an old English word for not very productive landscape, which is kind of unfair when you start getting into the ecology of how at least our Midwest ecology actually works. Okay, so speaking of that, in Illinois, we have had historically and prehistorically, ever since the ice ages, after the ice withdrew, a mosaic landscape, which has ranged from prairie and then there's marshes and bogs to savanna, to woodlands. Savanna is like 20% canopy cover up to woodland savannas, which are like very open woods. Those are the woods we really like to walk through because you can see a long way through the woods, and yet they're woods, so they're kind of shady and there's lots of birds. And then you get into more strictly woodlands. And then in Illinois, historically, there's actually been very, very few forests. And it's always been a wet state. One reason that we're able to grow so much corn and soy nowadays is because of all of the probably millions of linear feet of French drains and tiles that have been put in under the fields to drain the fields. Because I think of Illinois' natural state as wanting to be a wet prairie, or a wet mosaic, and that's borne out in if you read the history. And so if you think of it that way, you can start to think about, where would shrubs grow? What would they do? What about shrubs? And one thing that's kind of tricky is that the savannas, or the oak openings, that were such a characteristic of this landscape were fire dependent. In fact, the whole landscape was fire dependent. And when fires were started to suppress, what had been oak savannas became oak woodlands, and subsequently very crowded oak forests. And what had been what had been open oak woodlands and open woodlands with shrubs became too closed for the shrubs to live. And so now, when in modern days, people don't think about that, oh, this woodland should have shrubs in it, this savanna should have shrubs in it. And there's been a big debate for years after people first started realizing that there should be savannas, about the place of shrubs in the savannas. I don't worry about that too much because I just don't, because I have my own restoration activities that I'm working on. So this is an example of what the landscape used to look like. This is actually from southern Wisconsin. And you can see that there's a bunch of different, there's low shrubs, there's prairie, there's, then as you move towards the woodland, towards the trees, you start to see more shrubs, because it's a graduated kind of a landscape. You don't just go from prairie and then boom, you've got a forest. You have to have intermediate layers. You have shrubs, you actually have subshrubs, which is another topic, and you have understory trees, and then you have trees. And I'm in my own work right now, I'm finding that where we have a no-mow area, and then we have trees coming to that no-mow area, and we cleared out a lot of honeysuckle in that kind of boundary area, the edge area, and then we had to do a lot of resprout work. So this year, I grow native plants that I've collected seed from the forest, from my forest preserve. So I've been growing shrubs, and a friend of mine has too. So I've been putting shrubs in that edge area to help prevent too much buckthorn and honeysuckle from coming back. But we'll talk about that. I'm going to continue talking about that. And we also forget, when there are millions of acres of wild land, or well, actually, prior to European settlement, it was managed land. The Native Americans were managing it. The nations that lived here, they were managing it with fire. They were managing it over huge expanses, which is hard for us to imagine. But I mean, thousands of acres they were managing at a time through fire, through cooperative hunting agreements, through understanding that there were areas where you could, where there were a lot of berries, and so they would burn and then they would scatter ash there to help the berry bushes grow better. You know, because people think that this was like a foraged landscape, but it was actually a managed landscape, and it was not exactly agricultural the way we think of it, but it was still, they were producing food because you have to feed your people. But anyway, if you think in terms of literally millions of acres of prairie and savanna and woods, if you have a shrub that's gonna be clonal, that's gonna spread through its suckers, which I'm sure many of you have experienced, you know, that, oh, that darn serviceberry is putting suckers up on, you know, what am I gonna do about it? You have to remember, on the prairie or in the, you know, in the savanna, you have more than feet. You might have a half mile where nothing but sumac could grow, and it was okay. It wasn't a big deal. And so this is an example from Johnson's Nursery. They have some nice. They're in Wisconsin. They have some nice little articles on their website, showing gray dogwood and how it can be a cluster 75 feet wide. And the sumac can just go on forever. I'm sure you've seen that along roadsides or something. And that's something you have to be grateful for in the natural context, but you also have to manage that in your own suburban yard. And so here is sumac in an oak opening. Now, what's the point of having shrubs? Well, there's a lot of point. Not only are there layers, but we'll get into the wildlife benefits in a minute. So I was talking about the layers, and you can see in this little illustration how, and you can duplicate this in your garden, and actually should try to. You can have trees, then you have the subcanopy, which is your smaller flowering trees, flowering dogwoods, tall serviceberries, and the like, redbuds. And then you have a shrub layer, which kind of fills in around everything. And then you have a ground layer. And this is a beautiful pattern that pretty much anybody who can do in a garden. Let's say you don't have room for a tree in your own garden, but probably there's a parkway tree, or there might be a tree in your next door neighbor's yard, or something like that. So you can have a taller layer, and then you can, in your own place, you can plant a smaller tree. And in many yards, a smaller tree is actually more appropriate. West Cook has been selling, is it dwarf oaks lately, in their tree and shrub sales, and I'm interested to find out how that works. I don't have one myself. And then you can add a shrub. I mean, if you have one flowering tree and 2 shrubs and flowers, then your yard is already much more ecologically active and beneficial than if it was just a lot of grass and tulips and a barberry bush or something like that. And I know I'm speaking to the choir, but maybe some of the people that I'm speaking to now are not as experienced as some other people that are listening. So you get food and shelter for wildlife. And then this is a picture of shrubby St. John's wort, which is one of my very favorite shrubs. It's not too tall. You trim it back every spring. It has these beautiful yellow flowers. And the thing about these yellow flowers that's so wonderful is that they produce pollen. They don't have nectar. And the pollen happens to be a major limiting factor for bumblebees, because bumblebees rely on the pollen to and also other native bees rely on the pollen to be able to outfit their nests so that their larvae can have protein and fat in it to eat. They make pollen balls or bee bread, which is made with pollen and nectar mixed up together. And so there's carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And so I always like to plant shrubs that do offer only the pollen resources, because that is ensuring a good source of protein and fat for the bees that visit or live in my garden. And it's a really pretty shrub, and it's cheerful. And I put a row of them in my yard, and I'm always happy to see them in midsummer. So what do we get with shrubs that we don't necessarily get with other things? Well, fertile flowers, and pollen. Host plants for butterflies. Everyone should have milkweed in their yard, I hope. But and then shrubs also offer berries, groups, and nuts. And what I meant to say about the milkweed was, of course, milkweed, but there are a lot of shrubs that are host plants that flowers can't do. That was the point I was trying to make. So berries, drupes, and nuts for birds and other animals. Shelter for perching and nesting birds. And food and shelter for soil critters. Don't forget about the rhizosphere, which is the underneath the ground ecosystem, which involves all kinds of little critters and fungi and all kinds of things. And shrubs contribute to that. Mycorrhizae also have a mutualistic relationship with shrubs as well as trees. I mean, because you've all heard of the Wood Wide Web, I'm sure. And this is another shrub that has pollen resources, and I adore this shrub. It's swamp rose. But swamp rose, you have to be very careful with, because it's one of those crazy, wild, suckering roses, and does great in as it says, a swamp. It can spread out for yards and yards and yards. Well, if you're growing it in a suburban or urban place, I happen to have this underneath the gutter, and as you can see, the rain barrel. It's surrounded by concrete foundation, concrete walk. It's not going to go anywhere. My brother had one that I gave him, and it was a very wet corner of the yard, and it was one of the few things that would really be happy there. But he would mow around it regularly so that it wouldn't sucker up. So it's a great shrub. It offers pollen, and yet you have to know how to manage it. And there are native shrubs like that. But the amazing thing is, every morning, this shrub blooms in June. It offers pollen in the morning. So every morning, this is what was happening. And that bee, and actually later there were more, as the shrub grew bigger, there were a lot more bees. And the same thing for the shrubby St. John's wort. Every morning, the yard would be full of the sound of buzzing bees, and you could just sit on the deck and just be happy that all these little creatures were able to forage so well. Because if we hadn't put those particular shrubs in, those bees would be having to look somewhere else for that food. And I'm here to tell you, on my block, I don't know of anyone else who was providing it. And so it's a very good thing that you're doing if you are mindful of what these little creatures need. Whoops, sorry. Okay, so we all, I hope, know about the issues of buckthorn and non-native honeysuckle. They are Eurasian shrubs that were brought as desirable garden plants, desirable hedge plants. In Europe, where I've been, in England, on several occasions, I've seen buckthorn. It's part of the hedgerows. It doesn't take over. It's just there, okay? Here, completely different. It takes over. One thing is that honeysuckle and and buckthorn go into places where, let's say, deer have eaten all the shrubs, into disturbed areas. And that's what deer like to do. Young shrubs are delicious for them. And then they have other benefit, or things that are advantageous to them, which is they leaf out earlier than most everything else in the woods here, and they keep their leaves a lot longer. And they, like, because they're shrubs, if you cut them, they will regrow. You have to herbicide them at the stump. And their berries are fantastically, they make a lot of berries. Birds and deer eat the berries and then, of course, poop them out, and then you have a lot more of these shrubs. So it's kind of daunting. And I've been a volunteer for the forest preserves pretty much as long as I've been a native plant gardener, and you spend so much time trying to get rid of these things. But it can be done. I will show you something else pretty soon. Now, the thing about these berries, I was just talking about berries that are wonderful, that provide so much nutrition for birds and small mammals. And you would think that, okay, berries are berries, right? These produce berries, and they do have the unfortunate characteristic that they're invasive plants. But don't birds eat them? Yes, birds eat them. And in fact, deer also like to eat particularly honeysuckle berries. I've seen deer reach their 4 feet way up into a honeysuckle bush that's maybe 15 feet high and eat the berries as high as they can go. And the thing about these berries, according to Doug Tellamy, who is a world-renowned entomologist as well as being a native plant gardening leader, is that these berries, I mean, he studied this, these berries are not, their sugar and fat and protein profile is not what our birds need. They come out in the fall, late summer and fall, when birds are wanting to migrate. And what birds who are getting ready to migrate or migrating need is, again, fat and protein. They don't need as much sugar, except for hummingbirds, but that's a different story. And it's just not good for them. It doesn't provide what their bodies need. So there's a lot of reasons that we don't like them very much. And now they are illegal in Illinois. So if you have a buckthorn, or you have a honeysuckle, a non-native honeysuckle, you are breaking the law, basically. They're not allowed to be sold. They're not really allowed to be traded. Something like 30% of the woody material in Cook County is buckthorn. And it's a problem. And I'm sure a lot of you know this, but I walk around my neighborhood in North Oak Park and I see a lot of legacy gardens that they'll have 25-foot tall buckthorns loaded with berries in them. And it's a little daunting because you, the taxpayer, are paying a lot of money so that I, the volunteer, and the Forest Preserve crews can try to undo what's being done through this kind of horticulture. I can't think of any good words for it. Horticultural colonization, I guess that would be it. And the large horticulture companies know this. And there's currently a battle going on about calorie pear, which is invasive in the forest preserves. And it's about to become illegal in Illinois, we hope. And it's illegal, calorie pear is illegal in 22 states. You would think the horticulture industry would say, oh, maybe we made a mistake here. But no, you can still get it. You can buy them online. You can buy them all over the place. And they're not going to retreat. So anyway, enough of soapboxing. I apologize. All right. So I want to show you, the last pictures were a little bit, I'll go back to them just for a second, kind of polite. Okay, you got some low shrubs in here, and it's easy to say, so what, Okay, I'm going to show you a picture of my forest preserve, National Grove Woods. This, in this picture, is buckthorn. There are trees behind it, but you wouldn't know it. It was so thick, you wouldn't know that the Des Plaines River is right behind that wall of buckthorn. You wouldn't know there was a good view. Um, fishermen, made a tunnel through the buckthorn to go where they could drink beer and fish. But other than that, it was basically kind of a biological, unfortunate kind of a, not exactly a desert, but not biodiverse, not conducive to wildlife. Okay, so we spent quite a bit of time. I have a crew that includes chainsawyers, and I believe some people are on this Zoom call who were involved in this effort. We cleared it out, and lo and behold, there were a lot of trees, good trees, oak trees, for example, really nice. It had some really good potential. So we got rid of all that. We sowed seed that we had collected in other parts of the preserve and other preserves. And 2 years later, this was this August, that same area is a prairie savanna. And you can see those are wild golden glow in the front. There's bee balm, there's snake root, there's just so many wonderful native plants. And when you walk in there, I'm going to play the video for you. When you walk in there, there's pollinators galore. There are monarch butterflies. There are just, it's like a wonderful place full of life. And that was all because we spent about 2 years taking out buckthorn. And those are a couple of my friends. And so I think really you can see it's much more dramatic if you can see what actually happens, that what people plant in their yards, it doesn't stay in their yards. And I've had so many conversations with people about different invasive shrubs, and they say, well, I don't think anything happens because it's just in my yard and they're not really, spreading through my yard. Well, it does go elsewhere. Instead, there's so many native shrubs. This right here is a black haw viburnum. It grows wild in Thatcher Woods, and it makes nice little, these are unripe drupes, but they will turn a dark purple. Birds love them. They have the correct nutritional profile. It's just a really nice shrub. Now it gets tall. It can get up to 10 to 15 feet tall. So you have to think about where are you going to put it. But I planted two when I moved into my new place. I planted two in the back by the fence to the alley. We have a parking pad in back of our fence. So in a few years, they will provide a very nice screen. And then around them, I have planted various like, I don't know, purple coneflower, wild mint, mountain mint, sedges, all kinds of things. And it's a very nice little spot. And then I know that these shrubs are going to get taller and just provide that nice screen. And when they get to be that taller, when they get to be 6 or 8 feet tall, then the birds will also use them as preferred places to perch, because they have a structure that's kind of twiggy, and it offers a lot of cover, and yet it's not so dense like a buckthorn, for example, that a bird can't be comfortable inside of it. So American hazelnut, flowering viburnums. There's so many great viburnums. There's the round leaf. There's Viburnum dentatum, the arrowwood viburnums. There's the nannyberry viburnum. There's just a ton of viburnums, and they're all really good landscaping plants. And then the same thing for dogwoods. You've got flowering dogwoods, you've got red twig dogwoods, you've got round leaf dogwoods, you've got let me think, I can't think of them all, but pagoda dogwoods, each of which will fill a certain kind of a niche in a yard. Nine bark is a really nice plant. Now, a lot of people buy the horticultural nine bark. It's the same family, it's the same species even, but it's been selected a purple leaved version of it, which is very beautiful and it has the white flowers and everybody loves it. But I guess there's who knew there's a nine bark beetle that's a benign beetle, but it depends on having nine bark to live on, and it doesn't like the purple leaf nine barks. So just be aware of that. What are you going to do? I don't know. Elderberry, another really great shrub that can form a screen in the back of your yard. It has the really cool flowers. Attracts multi pollinators, and then there are the berries, which are very attractive to many animals. And one reason I'm stressing animals and pollinators so much is that as I was going through my gardening journey, at first, when I was trying to make a conventional garden, there were no insects. I was trying to kill insects. There were no birds. And when I started growing native plants and getting rid of the pesticides, there were these things flying around my flowers. Oh, well, it turned out they were native bees. And then there were other insects. And then I'll never forget the first day I saw a goldfinch come down into the garden, that bright yellow, beautiful little bird. And then I really understood that a garden is not a garden. It can be a collection of really nice looking horticultural ornamental plants, and it can be very ornamental visually, but it is not a garden. A garden is a 4-dimensional ongoing set of relationships, ecological relationships. And it's a part of the larger ecosystem that you live in, to me. I even have Lori Garden. I love Lori Garden. It's absolutely beautiful, and Piet Odolfs is a fabulous designer, but he could use more shrubs. He could use more native plants, and there's not as many pollinators in that garden downtown as one would hope that there would be. Okay, so the other two do not plant. Barberry and burning bush. In my new place that I moved to 2 years ago, there were 5 burning bush, Euonymus elatus, and they produced, again, flowers, same thing for barberry, and berries, and again, birds, and then you have a scourge. And I know I've seen, if you go up to Schiller Woods Forest Preserve, you will see literally acres covered with barberry. It's another, it's pretty. People like the red leaves of the red leaf virgin. It has thorns. Maybe you want something with thorns. I don't know, in certain situations. But it's, again, not biologically helpful. And there are so many native shrubs that have beautiful fall color. For example, the black chokeberry, which is pictured here. In the spring, there are particular species of little Andrena native bees that come just when ground dwelling, just when the flowers are blooming. There are the beautiful deep purple berries later in the fall, and it has beautiful orange fall color. It's gorgeous. And it's kind of cool. I have seen robins picking the berries and feeding their fledgling children with the berries, which is just very adorable. And because robins go through this stage where they're big, they're almost as big as their parents, and they can sort of fly, and they're following their parents around begging for food, and their parents are kind of starting to lose a little bit of patience, but then they will feed them these berries. You can get snowberry and coralberry if you have an area where you need some erosion control, or you want to just have a lot of shrubs and you don't want to think about it. those two species will just grow and they'll sucker and they'll make little pink flowers, and snowberry makes white berries, coralberry makes red berries, and they're just very, very pleasant shrubs to have around, and they have fall color. Same thing for the St. John's wort, has some nice fall color. Chokeberry turns a beautiful reds and deep purples. American wahoo is the American burning bush. Go ahead and plant some. They sell it at Possibility Place. They sell it maybe either Prairie Moon or Prairie Nursery sells it. It's a nice bush, and it does all the things that you would want a burning bush to do in terms of providing color and decorative value, but it's native, and so it has this extra dimension. All right, and here's just a little gallery of very nice shrubs. The only one I don't have experience with is fragrant sumac, but I'm told that it's really good. Pagoda dogwood, white flowers. It grows now. That'll grow 20 feet tall. It's got a beautiful layered kind of a profile. It'll have the dark blueberries show up on bright red stems, which is very attractive. Here's a picture of the snowberry I was talking about. American black currant, I have a few of those, and they like a damper area. They like some sun. They like it a little bit damp. They make their little yellow bell-shaped flowers, and then they have their black currants, and probably you'll never be able to harvest any of them because the animals like them. Then you've got, I was talking about the black haw viburnum, and here you can see how it looks in the spring. Here's the elderberry I was talking about. It's not in bloom. It has white blooms, but it is, I think it's after bloom. It's developing its berries. Red twig dogwood is another one for a kind of a damper area. If you plant it where you've got, I would not put it over where there's a drain going to, a sewer drain going to the street, for example, because its roots might try to seek in there and get the water out of that. But it's a good place for a low kind of damp area, like a rain garden, for example. Bladdernut is it has a delicate look, and it doesn't make berries. It makes bladders. They're like little balloon-shaped capsules that have a fruit inside of them, or a seed, and then the chokeberries. So these are just some. I wanted to give you some close-ups just of what some of the attractiveness of some of these shrubs and the attractions, I should say. All right, so shrub rules. These are things that I have learned through hard experience. You can know this, but until you, unless you just follow the rules, which I never have been able to do very well, you will learn. It's all I can tell you. So these are some wafer ash, which I propagated. I collected the seeds in the forest preserve, and they put them through what they call double cold stratification, which is a fairly involved process to kind of fool them into thinking that they really didn't need 2 years to grow. They only could go through one winter and do it. So they did. And these are going to go back in the forest preserve. But they're cute. These are 1 gallon pots. They're cute little shrubs. The thing about the wafer ash, and one reason it's so good, is that it's one of the only 2 citrus species that grow in Illinois, northern Illinois. And I'll tell you why that's good in a minute, because I'm going to go back to the rules here. So you want to plant a shrub according to how big it is going to get, which is hard to imagine. And I walk around neighborhoods all the time, and I see places where people have they've crammed in evergreens, say, right next to the foundation, and then they grow. You know, they put in what looked good when the evergreen was 2 feet high and 3 feet wide, and they didn't realize it was going to grow to be 10 feet high or higher and 10 feet wide, and then they've got a crowding situation, or they've got their windows are completely blocked, which you'll see a lot. Same thing for deciduous shrubs. Understand how big are they going to get, because you can do a lot with pruning, but you don't want to be spending your life pruning. The ideal is to let a shrub grow to its natural size, um, and then do the kind of light pruning that it needs, um, which varies from shrub to shrub. And some need more, like the shrubby St. John's wort. I cut them back by a third every early spring before they leaf out, and that works to keep them compact, and it also helps with their flowering because they flower on new wood. Understand the light and water requirements. Okay, this Black Haw viburnum, I believe, likes it a little bit drier than its cousin Nannyberry viburnum. It may have them switched, but they have two kind of overlapping but kind of distinct sets of things that where they prefer to grow. Wafer ash like it drier. Blatternut like it a little bit damper. And throughout the shrubs, you'll find that. And it's helpful to know if you, let's say you have some Norway maples, which I inherited in my new place, and I cannot cut them down right now, because they are kind of on the fence line, and my neighbor likes them too. So I'm growing plants to compensate for the Norway maples. I'm going to put in a wafer ash under one of them. I'm investigating sedges that really like drier soil, and I'm trying to provide biodiversity in a way that can be comfortable, even though it's growing with this Norway maple, because Norway maples are they're water hogs. Their roots go all over the surface, and it's very difficult for a lot of plants to really manage against that aggressiveness. And I have found that even if it's native plants, under a Norway maple, you're still going to want to do some watering. It's just the nature of how it is. And the other thing that I did was, the neighbors and we had the trees trimmed up high so that they don't block out too much sunlight. And then the third thing I'm going to do is I got some Virginia creeper, and I'm going to let it grow up the trunk of one of the maples, because then that becomes more helpful to birds and insects. Suckering is a thing with a lot of native shrubs, and you have to be aware of it. There are extreme cases like the swamp rose that I was showing you. There are more gentle cases, like some, not all, but some service berries might decide that they'd like to be a little bit more multi-stemmed than you were necessarily planning for. Some shrubs, when their branches touch the soil and lay down on the soil, they will form new roots from that branch. And this is all part of shrubs' amazing adaptability. Out in nature, this is a virtue. You can have fire and shrubs will come back. You can cut them down and they'll come back. They also have most shrubs have a remarkable ability to sequester carbon. They have a remarkable ability to photosynthesize because they have so many branches and so many leaves, and they're just a very interesting and adaptable life form, and one that's worthy of respect. But if you're gonna plant them in your home, then you don't need to be afraid of them, but you just kind of would want to be more aware of, okay, this particular shrub, it's going to put up some suckers. Well, I'm willing to cut them down. Or the same shrub, oh, this is a corner where I'd really like to be kind of shrubby in this corner, so I'm just going to let it turn into a little kind of mini thicket. There's a lot of different ways to handle it. And the other thing to remember is that not all shrubs are monoecious, which means they have male and female flowers on the same plant and can self-fertilize. A lot of shrubs you may need, if you want flowers and fruit, you might need to get 2 or 3. So that's also something to be aware. So if you're really going to be, if you're going to be serious about shrubs and wanting to do more with them, there is a learning curve. It's not just going to the Home Depot and picking out a barberry and bringing it home and plopping it on the ground, because horticultural varieties are specifically bred to stay where they're put. They're not bred to propagate themselves. They're not, they're selected for these very kind of contained ways of being. So there's the wafer ash when it grows. Very nice shrub. Look, oh look, it grew, became a multi-stem shrub. Some do, some don't. It's tall. Look at it compared. This is at the Morton Arboretum compared to the tree, to this other evergreen. It's a nice shrub. I love wafer ash. They're fabulous. And the reason that they're important, I said I would tell you this. Okay, one of 2 species of citrus. They are the host plants for the giant swallowtail butterfly, which is pretty rare, and also tiger swallowtails. Now we see the black swallowtails flying around, and they love golden Alexanders. They love parsley. They'll put their eggs on parsley, and every year I have a lot of black swallowtail eggs and caterpillars in my parsley. Tiger swallowtails, I didn't know, their host plants are like this, and I think there's some other host plants, but the wafer ash is the one that I'm talking about, and so they're dependent on it. National Grove, my forest, sorry, National Grove, I have a cat, sorry. Okay, National Grove, my forest preserve, you will see occasionally giant swallowtail butterflies there, and very rarely do you see them. I've never seen one anywhere else. I know some people have seen them in places when I talked to them about it. Okay. All right, where and how to use native shrubs. Okay, I was just talking about using it as a living fence or a hedgerow, as a screen. You can put them in flower beds and plant around them. That can be very effective. You can use them as a ground cover, as an erosion control, like the coralberry I was talking about. You can use them as foundation plantings. Well, in the Midwest, there is a rule. You have to have something growing by your foundation. You're not allowed to have a bare foundation. Okay, that's a joke, but walk around your neighborhood sometime and see what people have done. There's another unwritten rule in Oak Park that you have to have at least one hydrangea and probably some boxwood. Those are the most, in my informal count, those are the 2 most common shrubs walking around and seen in Oak Park walking around. Now this is an oak leaf hydrangea, and it is being used kind of right next to the house wall, next to a walk. It's a very nice place for it. It'll grow 8-10 feet tall, maybe taller. It is actually native a little bit south and east of here. But we are starting to have a lot of plants coming into the forest preserves and also that thrive here in our region, that come from the south and east, partly because, or just from the south, partly because of climate change. And a great example, and municipalities are starting to plant trees that are not necessarily native to Cook County. For example, my favorite example is bald cypress. They're actually native to Southern Illinois. Well, 20 years ago, Morton Arboretum decided they were going to try them up here. And they thrive, they're great, and municipalities are using them too. And there are other plants also that do very well around here. And they're native, they're US natives, but they're not strictly native to Cook County or even the area right around the tip of Lake Michigan. And so things are changing very rapidly now because of climate But oak leaf hydrangea is desirable. It's a nice shrub and it looks good. I like it. I don't have one. I like it. So how much room do you have? Big deal. Like I was talking. What are the planting conditions? Is that shrub going to get abused? Is it going to get watered once in a while? Is it going to try to take over, or is it going to, coexist nicely with the other native plants you're growing? These are, is the soil dry? Is there a lot of sun? Is there part sun? Most older suburbs are kind of savanna conditions. There's street trees, there's trees in the backyards. It's what you're going to find a lot. I'm not saying always, because there's newer suburbs, there's places where there's just a lot of sun, but what you're going to be dealing with a lot is part shade and part sun. And again, what purpose will they serve? So these are the things to ask yourself when you're thinking about shrubs. And might, if you answer some of these questions for yourself, you won't just say, oh, that's a pretty shrub. I think I'll bring it home. You want to find out, what is it? How does it like to grow? Where does it like to grow? And again, always, please don't grow a shrub, a mulch garden is what I call them, where you have a row of shrubs, and all you have underneath them is bark mulch, which is not ecologically helpful. Hopefully, you are leaving your leaves year round. It's not that you leave them in the fall and clean them up in the spring. You leave your leaves year round after they fall, under the shrubs, under the trees. They're so beneficial in so many ways. They literally recycle the nutrients that are in the leaves that the trees and shrubs were using all spring and summer. They recycle that through the magic of the earth ecosystem and all the little critters. It goes right back into the soil. It's like adding vitamins. You don't really need fertilizer. And all of these plants grew up through a layer of leaves. And it looks nice. That's a service berry. I didn't make very much effort to control it or shape it or anything else. So and it's growing in a situation which there's not a lot of sun, so it's kind of leggy. And so this was in my old house. So what I did was I just started planting sedges and ginger and wild geraniums and oh Lord, starry campion and all kinds of little things. And it turned out Jack in the Pulpit. Down here. Anyway, it just turned out to be really pleasant. It was just a really nice little spot, and people would actually. This was when I was about halfway done planting. It expanded to come all the way around, and people would stop and tell me how nice it looked. And the serviceberry was actually happier. Trees and shrubs want to grow in an area that has other plants. Growing them in an area that just is either covered with turf grass or is covered with mulch, particularly bark mulch, is not good for their health. It's better ecologically for them to be growing with a variety of other species that they can use. They're like companion plants. And I will say wood chips, like I get wood chips free from Oak Park. I'm expecting a delivery whenever they get, well, pretty soon, when they start trimming trees again, they'll bring you 3 cubic yards, which is enough for a reasonable sized property for about a year. And you can share it with your neighbors. And that's, it's wood chips. It's like what you would have in the woods, just from fallen trees or something like that. And that's actually a light layer of that is actually pretty beneficial. So you can plant all kinds of things. And I sort of go for 50% sedges and grasses and 50% flowers, right around there. You can do 60-40. And that gives you a balance, it gives you some structure, and it is kind of similar to what you might see again in a woodland savanna in our region. So hopefully you'll start with a plan. As I said, I did not start with a plan before because I was learning, and now this time I moved into a place that has a slightly bigger yard, and it has a beautiful garden layout, and it was full of invasive plants. It had 5 burning bushes. It had ditch lilies, which are the invasive daylilies that can take over acres if you let them. It has the horticultural onions that I'm still working to control. It was almost like you name a native invasive plant, I had it. Well, I didn't have honeysuckle and buckthorn, but so this time I made a plan, and I am going about, the first thing I planted were the shrubs, and then my second wave of planting, ongoing, were sedges and grasses, because you want, oh, that's the other thing I had was several kinds of invasive Eurasian ornamental grasses. Ugh. Those are a pain to dig out, I will tell you. But if you do it that way, and now you can have a professional like Red Twig come in and they'll design it for you and they'll plant it all in a couple of days for you, and it's really, really great. And if you're going to have a rain garden done, it is helpful to have a professional because they can dig it down to the right, they can engineer it properly. You know, there's considerations. I myself have always been stubbornly DIY, and so it never looks professional, but it's also deeply, deeply satisfying for me as the gardener to really understand the plants and what I'm doing. But the sedges, of course, and the grasses help give structure to the garden, and they help manage the soil, manage water in the soil. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll start with the sedges. I'll start with the shrubs. I planted, I think, 5 species of shrubs. And then I started putting in the sedges, and then I started putting in the flowers. And I'm doing that right now. There's a little bioswale area I'm building, making between mine and my neighbor's house, where the gutter comes down and then spills into this long, narrow strip of soil. And so I just yesterday and today put in 3 species, a species of grass and 2 species of shrubs. And then in the spring, I'll layer in some wild geraniums and some other things that can handle wet. But anyway, start with a plan, even if it's just a scribble on a piece of paper, just to help you visualize what are you going to make. And then this is a plan where, if you look at what it was before, this was the existing garden. Doesn't say what the species are, but it's kind of bare, lots of grass. Then they made this plan. They said, oh, I've got a lot of sun. I'll make a prairie garden. Oh, look, I can put low shrubs. I can put small trees in this corner and shrubs around here. And look, then it's a more protected area from my neighbors or the traffic or whatever. And you'll notice how many shrubs all around here. Evergreens can be good for the birds in the winter. All around here, just wrapping around the house. And that house, and then you put your favorite flowers, maybe in a little flower garden, you have your bird feeders. And so then that house, when you go out in the backyard, it's like a nature refuge. And it's just endlessly refreshing. You don't even have to go to a park. You can just go in your backyard. And I did this in South Oak Park, actually. That was my old house, I think it was 35 by 50 feet, not much. And I put a wild grapevine over a pergola on our back porch, and we would sit in there and kind of look out from the shade of the grapevine, and it was just remarkable, the beauty of not just the garden, but of the the wildlife that would be there. And it was really nice. It was like taking a little vacation every time you'd go outside in the morning and drink your coffee or whatever. So I highly recommend that. And now I'm trying to do the same thing with our new place. And here's another example of these are actually rain gardens. But I wanted to show them because this is a rain garden for sun. This is a rain garden for shade. You'll notice that they have very similar layouts. They both have room for larger shrubs on the left. In the sunny garden, you could plant anything like dogwood, ninebark, or red maple, shrubby St. John's wort, wild hydrangeas. There's a variety of things you could plant. And then on the right, it's, let me see, where is it? H-I-J, it's hard to read. You've got other, like some gray dogwood or some button bush or something like that. So the plant has a range of different choices that you could put. And it's very useful because it shows, it's showing the shrubs. You have a variety of shrubs that are adapted to the conditions of the place where it's going to be planted. And that's the value of professional planning. If you can afford it, if you want to go that route, if you can get a good professional to help you with it, there's a lot of value to that. And I really respect the native plant landscapers that I know. And then in the same thing. Now this is a shady area. So over here on the right hand side, instead of your button bush, you've got pagoda dogwood, say, and over here on the left, you've got a rosebay rhododendron or an arrowwood viburnum because it's shadier. Whereas over here you would have your ninebark, which loves sun. Okay, so these are important. And then just to show you, this is actually a professionally designed rain garden, but it could be any kind of a garden in Oak Park. There's some shrubs back here. They've got, I'm not sure what kind of a tree this is, but I know it's native. And then it's designed, I know that it's engineered because the homeowners told me that they no longer have flooding in their basements because they have a rain garden, and it was an engineered rain garden. And then they have this beautiful planting in their front yard. And then the other touch I love is they put prairie dropseed grass as an edging along their sidewalk, which is, it's really nice. And then of course, prairie dropseed, when you walk by it at this time of year or in August, it's a wonderful smell of buttered popcorn will follow you. It's just really kind of a fun thing. And this is a garden. This was in our garden walk this year. I took this picture in July, and it's in Forest Park. And here again, these folks did not hire a professional; they did it themselves. But you'll notice that there's things in common with the prior garden. They've got their row of stone edging, always important to show intentionality. They've got plants that are suitable. There's a lot of sun, so they've got their bee balm. They've got their black-eyed Susans. They've got a lot of really good stuff. Some grasses, and then at the end, as a screen from the street, they've got this beautiful set of elderberries. And elderberry is a suckering shrub, and it will fill in. You can plant a couple if you want, and then they have flowers in front. And so and then they have their little bird feeder. It's just a very attractive garden. And there were a lot of really good gardens on that walk, but this one, this picture illustrated what I'm trying to talk about in this talk, so that's why I'm featuring it. So there's a couple of other things I just want to cover quickly. Hydrangeas. Okay, we have wild hydrangeas, Hydrangea arborescens. We have non-native hydrangeas. We have hydrangeas that are bred to have huge snowballs. We have cultivars of Hydrangea arborescens, Annabelle. What I would like to encourage people to do is get wild hydrangeas. Now, again, there are another plant that's coming in a little bit from the southeast, but that's okay. And the thing to know about hydrangeas, that what you think are the flowers, you'll see there's all flowers here. This one looks a little more raggedy, right? What you think are the flowers are not the flowers. They don't have the stamens, and they don't produce the pollen. What you're looking for here, you see how it looks kind of fuzzy? I wish I had a close up at it, but those are actually the flowers. They don't look like the flowers. They're just whoops, sorry about that. My cat is here again. Hello, cat. Whoops. Come on. Sorry, I apologize. I'm cat sitting for my daughter's cats. Anyway, you see how it's kind of fuzzy, and that those are the fertile structures, the pollen producing and nectar producing structures, and that's what the bees go for. These are very beautiful to our human eyes, but again, they are for ornament, not biological function. So just be aware of that. You look for something that says wild hydrangea. You can look it up on the Morton Arboretum, and they will talk all about it. All right, so just a refresher, if you want to take a screenshot, what not to plant, the asterisks are the ones that are particularly bad. I mean, if you have a non-native hydrangea, you have a lilac, it's fine. I've got a couple of non-native hydrangeas, and I'm not going to get rid of them. You know, they're not hurting anything. They're not invasive. It's okay. But what I'm planting, also adding, are the natives. And there's such a long list. This is not even a complete list of wonderful, in all sizes, all growing conditions, all very, very satisfactory in their own ways. And I always close my talks with this picture. This is a landscape by Larry Weiner, who is a giant in landscape designers on the East Coast, but a lot of people know about who he is here too. It's kind of an old picture, but I just love it because it so exemplifies how you can make a garden. And I know it's large, but you can make a garden that is beautiful in strictly human terms, but is also beautifully ecologically functioning. And you've got flowers. I mean, we all love flowers, but you've also got shrubs. And then in the background, you've got the big trees. He borrowed the trees from back here. Okay, so you can do that. Your neighbor has a tree. Okay, you don't have to plant a tree. You can plant shrubs in the shade or whatever. These are some of my favorite books. Flora of the Chicago region is a big, heavy book, and the thing about it is it is not doesn't compromise. So the names are all in Latin. They will tell you the common name after the Latin entry, but you can look up any plant that grows in the Chicago region in that book, and it will tell you what its companion plants are. And that's one way that I've known what to plant in many areas, is because I'll look up, what grows with shrubby St. John's wort, or what likes to grow with Black Haw viburnum, or what likes to grow with purple cone flowers, right? What likes to grow with sweet black-eyed Susans, and they'll just give you a list of what it is. But it can be kind of daunting. And so that's why I also like these other books that are a little bit, they're more gardener friendly, I guess you would say. I really like this one, Native Plants of the Midwest. These are some very nice ones. And then Planting in a Post-Wild World talks about some of the things I was talking about, what to plant first, using your accent plants, where you put, you have your low growing infilling plants, and then you have your striking plants that are perennials and really show off. You have those things. And then anything by Doug Tallamy. If you've never read anything by him, he is so knowledgeable, and yet he's so genial and friendly in his tone, that and he's hopeful. You know, he started Homegrown National Park. He's trying to get the American public to grow natives on their 40 million acres of lawn that are, and so it would collectively be much bigger than any of our biggest national parks. He's just a really great guy. And his newest book is called How You Can Help. And it's really like an FAQ. You can browse through it, and there'll be some question, and then he'll give you a long paragraph of explaining about it. You know, what about why oaks are better, or what how to grow your trees, or even how to deal with ticks. You know, why are there so many deer ticks and so much Lyme disease, and he'll give you an answer. And one thing he said in this new book that I didn't know is that we all mourned our ash trees when they died because of the emerald green ash borer. Well, now they have found two parasitoid wasps that only prey on emerald ash borers, and it's effective. And so what is hoped for is some kind of a balance. And so if they're telling us, he's saying to forest preserve restorationists, don't cut down all the young ash trees, you know, because those parasitoid wasps are going to start spreading, and eventually, yeah, some will succumb, but some will grow, and eventually we will have some ashes back, and maybe not in the numbers that we used to, but it's an example of a hopeful development that entomologists were able to find these benign to all of other species little wasps that only prey on the emerald ash borers. And so that, you know, to me, that's a very hopeful thing. Anyway, online resources, if you want to take a screenshot, these are some of my favorite ones. Morton Arboretum, you can look up pretty much any shrub, and there will be a whole thing about how to take care of it, and if there are cultivars, et cetera, et cetera. Someone's drawing something that's interesting. And we have a YouTube channel where you can see talks. And these are just some pretty good. Forest preserves of Cook County. Go take a walk in the preserves. That's one really good way to see what our landscapes have been, should be, could be, how you could adapt, what you could adapt for your own home. Where to buy native plants? Well, sure, West Cook Wildwoods, definitely. But these are some of my other favorites. And if you go to our website, we have a lot of resources, and we also have a list of good native plant designers. And so that's all.